You're listening to the Balanced Educator Podcast, episode number 130. Welcome to the Balanced Educator. We're your hosts, Kaylee
and Josiane from EduCalm. Our intention is to equip and empower you to feel more calm, balanced, and joyful in all aspects of your life.
Hello there and welcome. We are so excited to have you with us today. In this episode, we are talking about trauma. So trauma can really negatively affect a student's ability to learn. And you might be surprised to learn in this episode that there's probably more students in your classroom that have experienced trauma than you might think. So creating a trauma-sensitive classroom supports all learners and equips students with skills that are going to support them in coping with difficult experiences that they might face in their future, because we never know when a traumatic experience might happen to us. So in this episode, we've invited Kimberly Mackey to teach us about trauma and give us concrete strategies that we can implement in elementary to high school classrooms. Kimberly is a school social worker and is certified as a trauma practitioner with Starr Commonwealth. She is well known as an advocate for the role of school social work in supporting staff and students and for building trauma-sensitive schools. In this episode, you will learn what trauma is and why it's important for teachers to understand it, why teachers support all learners in the classroom when they teach in a trauma-sensitive way. You're going to learn concrete strategies that you can use to create a trauma-sensitive classroom at both the elementary and high school levels. And you're going to get a list of great resources that you can use to learn more about trauma and how you can teach in a trauma-sensitive way in your classroom. Before we jump into this episode, we're happy to share this week's sponsor, Pockets Change. Pockets Change is building financial resilience through hip-hop pedagogy. If you aren't sure what that means, you have to listen to our episode number 120 called Teaching Financial Wellbeing, where we interviewed one of the founders of Pockets Change, Andrea Ferrero, and she taught us that finance education is more than just numbers. It's actually a tool for self-care and social justice. Pockets Change provides workshops, curriculum, and professional development where students, parents, and educators develop an understanding of their personal relationship with money, and they learn new ways of thinking and talking about money, and they develop the skills to take action and to advocate for themselves and others. So I've used their curriculum in my classroom, and I just really love how their lessons make talking and teaching about money feel easy. Sometimes money can feel kind of like a touchy subject, but they really remove kind of those barriers and those stigmas of there's one right way and really focus on what's right for you. So it's like this practice of self-care and well-being through learning about your finances, which I love. Celebrate Financial Literacy Month in your classroom with Pockets Change curriculum. Make finance personal for your students with the Spending Values activity. So you can get that at pocketschange.com/spending-values. Again, that's pocketschange.com/spending-values. I did this activity in my classroom and I loved it, so you'll definitely want to check it out. All right, now let's get into this week's episode. Hello there, Kimberly. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today. We have been wanting to have you on the show for a while now, so it's very exciting to have you here. To start off, can you introduce yourself to our audience?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm a big fan of the podcast, so it's just a thrill to be asked to speak with you today. My name is Kimberly Mackey. I am a school social worker and have been for the last 21 years, even though I'm really young. And certainly not the mother of 3 growing daughters. But I'm a school social worker in my regular life, and I'm also a graduate student of social work outside of school, and so I do some community work as well as part of that. And over the course of my career, I have completed some certifications as trauma practitioner and working with children and youth who've experienced difficulties. And so it's a pleasure to be able to speak with you today about that topic.
Yes, I'm very excited to have you on. You had done a professional development day with our team at the school that I work at earlier on in the school year, and I just really loved your approach to teaching teachers about trauma. So we are going to dive right into that today. Before we get started, or I guess the first question I'd like to start with, just so that we're all on the same page, is what is trauma? So how would you define trauma? And why do you think it's important for teachers to understand what trauma is?
And that's a really great question. And the truth is that trauma is really any experience that leaves a person feeling unsafe. So we think that we have ideas about what that might be, that it has to be a dramatic event or a very specific, large trauma. But the truth is that it's any experience that leaves us feeling hopeless or helpless or fearing for our own safety. And so for a child, that may mean seeing their parent sick or having a seizure. It certainly may mean a house fire or moving and divorce. It may also mean things that are chronic problems like having the utilities turned off and living in poverty and not knowing from one day to the next if there'll be supper. And so these kinds of events are experiences that become felt by the body. And so trauma is an experience. It's not a mental illness, and it's an experience that our body holds and that we then are responding to. And so it's important that we understand it in education because it can happen to anyone at any time and because it's so prevalent. And what we know from the statistics is that at least 1 in 4 students has experienced a traumatic event, and the statistics in Manitoba are even higher. There was some information published by New Directions a few years ago that indicated it was probably closer to half of all students having had an experience of trauma. So when you think about your classroom, if you think about 25 to 50% of those students needing some trauma-sensitive responses from their adults in their building, then it's really important that we all know how to approach that.
Yeah. So I didn't realize that the statistic was so high. That's new to me and makes me even more excited to dive into what are ways that we can sort of respond to trauma as teachers. So I guess my first question now is so if so many students have probably experienced trauma in their lives, is this something that as teachers we need to be aware of? What is that trauma? Should we be trying to dive into that, or is that not necessary?
Well, that's a great question. And I think that's where sometimes we get a little bit confused because we think as adults we have to know the specifics of what the trauma is and then how do we deal with that specific event or that specific experience. But the truth is, when the numbers are that high, we don't need to know those details. We don't need to re-traumatize the traumatized youth or coworker that we're working with in order to be able to respond in a trauma-informed, trauma-sensitive manner, because that kind of response will help all of the students in our classroom. And it's actually really exciting to speak to educators about this because I'm a school social worker. My goal is to help children be in a better position to learn, right? That's the school part of school social worker. And when we approach students in a trauma-sensitive way and give them what they need to regulate, then they're going to be prepared to learn. And that's ultimately the goal for all of us in education. We want to have students who are here able to learn. And so we don't want to re-traumatize. We don't want to identify traumatic details and do counseling in the classroom. That's not what being trauma-informed is about. It's about approaching our class and our students in a way that is helpful to all of them, including the 25 to 50% that maybe have already had an experience in their life or are about to, right? We don't know what's around the next bend for any of us. And so we're all, a moment away from having a car accident on the way home, or a slip and fall with a head injury, or any number of unpredictable things. I mean, the pandemic itself, for some people, has been a pretty difficult experience for many people, right? And so how do we help to deal with those experiences? We don't have to think of them as large traumas to be able to deal with that as an experience in the classroom.
That's great to know as a teacher because, immediately as a teacher, you think of, well, I don't have time to be able to sit with each child and know their entire story as much as we would love to. So it's great to know that there's practices we can do in the classroom that are going to ensure that we're supporting, like you said, all of the students that might have experienced different traumas in different ways, but also equip them for any future trauma that they might experience.
Right.
So I'd love now to get right into what are some concrete ways that we can be trauma sensitive as teachers in the classroom. I'd like to talk about what this can look like in an elementary school classroom and if it might be different in a high school classroom.
Okay, that's great. There are a lot of similarities, but perhaps different ways of approaching it. And I think that listeners to your podcast are going to be quite familiar with some of the strategies I share, because these are the tips that you're already teaching all the time through your podcast and through your work, Kaylee. So I think it will sound like a familiar refrain, but the truth is that is what students who have experienced a traumatic event or ongoing trauma in their life need, because we must start by addressing the sensory experience that is trauma. And so when I said a minute ago that the body holds the trauma, we know that we must respond to kids' sensory needs and regulate that system and calm that system and give them a sense of safety. And so that, of course, looks differently depending on what age you're teaching, doesn't it? And you've done lots of talking about that. But in an elementary classroom, safe, predictable routines, having students understand what's going to happen here on any given day, having students understand what's going to happen if there's a substitute teacher or a change in the schedule, and then having that regulatory routine to your classroom is so important. And I would say that that's exactly what we would want to do at the high school setting as well. As you know, I'm a social worker for K to 12 students, so I work with students of all ages. And what we need to understand is that if we can't regulate emotion and help people feel safe at any age, their brain is not ready to learn. And that includes us as adults. If I walk into a building and I don't feel safe there, I'm not going to retain the information I take in that space.
Yes.
And so we first must help with feeling safe and getting regulated. And then the next piece to that is connecting. And so we know the importance of relationships. I'm not telling you anything new there, but Dr. Bruce Perry speaks about how just one significant healthy relationship can help a traumatized child to recover and thrive. And that's then an opportunity to learn and be educated, isn't it? So never underestimate the protectiveness that we have as educators and as adults, because we heal in the context of relationship, and good relationships at school are one of the greatest protective factors we can give to students.
That's great. And building relationships in the classroom can be sometimes challenging as a teacher. You have all these students in your classroom, or in this context, many of us are teaching online. And I know a lot of the conversations that I'm having with colleagues is like, how are we building that connection? How are we ensuring that our students, feel like they can talk to us, or they feel that they can be themselves around us, and that we're building these real connections, even if we're teaching online? So when we're building connections with students, sometimes, it can feel like that needs to be a big thing, but it can really be something that's just built into the daily routine, so that that you're there's a point of contact with each student, and that over the course of the week or the semester or the year, that you just get to deepen that relationship over time. It doesn't have to be all done in one day.
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, the repetition is so important, right, to changing those patterns in the brain. So absolutely correct there. That repetition of safe responses is what needs to happen over time.
Awesome. So what are some other strategies that teachers can be using to ensure that they're teaching in a trauma-sensitive way and creating a I'm having a hard time with the word trauma today, trauma-sensitive classroom atmosphere?
Right. Well, first of all, we want to be cognizant of how we look at kids. And so when we are seeing really difficult behaviors and not sure about what's been happening, we often have a mindset, an unconscious mindset, I will say, of what's wrong with that student, what's going on. And I want us to start by consciously framing that sentence to what has happened and what may still be happening. And so if we notice, for example, that a student is continuously coming to school without lunch, or we notice that a student is continuously crying before they head home, we have to ask, what is happening in this person's life that may be causing this response, as opposed to what's wrong with them, right? And just changing that mindset is a great place for us as the adults to start. But we can't underestimate the importance of play and outdoor activities and recess time and, connecting to healthy mind-body strategies. So all of the mindfulness things that you teach, all of our sensory tools that we use in schools, using our routines, as I talked about a minute ago, but also those calm and competent adult interactions that we can have with students at various times through the day, right? As they're coming into the classroom, as they're leaving, going and taking that time to check in, which is very difficult right now with the virtual learning. But I'm doing all of my counseling virtually, and I take time in almost every session to have playtime and have laughter and be able to connect in ways that let them know that they are important to me, that I value our time together, and that whatever work we have to do, I'm as delighted to see them this week as I was last week, right? Like, we have to light up when they walk into our space and let them know that they are our why for being here. The technology isn't working and things are hard and we can't play outside close like we did before. Or we can't do group work like we did before at the high school level, but you're my reason for being here. And connecting is so important to helping with that regulation and ability to learn. So Dr.
That's
Bruce
so
Perry
powerful.
talks about, yeah, it really is. It really is so important to know that we have that kind of power to make that much of a difference.
And that just made me think, like, if I was a kid or a teenager and an adult said to me, like, you're the reason I'm here, like, I am here for you, that just, or even as an adult, like, just thinking of hearing that from someone as an adult, you're the reason I'm here right now. Like, that just, it feels good. And automatically I already feel, just saying that, like, this sense of opening in my posture and a relaxing of the shoulders, having to just hearing that phrase. And I think that that's something that we can absolutely do during the day, just saying, I'm so happy you're here to people that arrive to your classroom. And even if they're late every day, always saying, I'm happy to see you. I'm happy you're here.
Yes.
And, and even addressing the whole class, like, hey, it was great. This was a great class today. Thanks, guys.
Yes.
It can be something, it doesn't take long, but it can be so powerful.
Absolutely. Dr. Jody Carrington talks about how our first response to trauma is to armor up. She says we put up our walls and we don't want to let anyone in because our body goes into protective mode, right? We go to that basic fight, flight, freeze response where now we need to protect ourselves. And being able to get that armor down, being able to connect, being able to regulate together allows our system to feel safe. It allows it to give up the fight, flight, freeze default that it's gone to after a traumatic event. So I've heard you on the podcast be talking about different ways of teaching regulation and mindfulness to different ages, and I will just say people need to listen more to your podcast because that's exactly where you want to start. Dr. Bruce Perry has a wonderful diagram that he shows. It's an upside down triangle is how I think of it. And at the bottom, he starts with regulate and then relate and then reason. So we think of it as, calming our system and then connecting and then teaching. And we can't do it in a different order. He's a trauma specialist who talks about the fact that we so often try to reason first, and we haven't done the regulating and connecting. And
I love hearing that because those are the exact steps that we recommend doing with EduCalm classrooms. Start by listening to the audio. Everyone feels calm afterwards. Then we have a moment of connection where we just check in with our students, have some discussion time, and then we start teaching. So it's nice to know that our model aligns with what's being taught for trauma-sensitive specific practices.
Of course, and you can see that's why we say these kinds of approaches are good for everyone in the room. You don't just have to be doing this with the 50% of your students who may have gone through a traumatic event. You're going to do this with everyone because it's useful to everyone and because those strategies are protective factors for us for any trauma in our future, right? Yeah. We so often with trauma focus on what has happened or what that event is or what our adverse childhood experience has been, because that study is what started a lot of these conversations. But we really are trying to shift the focus to protective factors. We can't stop that there's going to be a traumatic event or a pandemic or an unexpected event that throws us off path. But we can build protective factors around one another and support one another in that way. And again, I just go back to school connectedness is one of the most protective resilience factors that we can support children with having. And that's our role as adults, is to build that connectiveness.
That's amazing. And I find that it can be easier to forget that as a high school teacher when, you're only seeing your students for one period per day, or in today's context, you're only seeing them every other day. And the mind wants to tell you, we have so much to cover. We have so much material to do. Teach, teach, teach. It's so easy to get caught up in that. And that's been one practice that I've been doing this year, is recognizing when my brain wants to tell me that I don't have time for connection, and just see, okay, that thought is there and I'm not going to listen to it, because the most important thing is connection. And time again, when I take that time for connection at the beginning of each class, I accomplish more in the academics every time. Yes. But it's crazy how much my brain wants to tell me. It's, I've been so trained that there's so much material, we have to get through it all. So if anyone's listening and is in that same boat where your mind's telling you, I don't have time, when are we going to connect? There is time, and it actually gives you more time in the end.
Yes, absolutely. It gives us more actual learning time, doesn't it? Because our brain has settled and our brain is ready to learn. And I would add to that, Kaylee, that we're also, I think, as we age and get older in the school system, we tend to teach from the shoulders up, and we forget about the mind-body connection. And supporting children who have experienced something traumatic in their lives, again, it's held as a sensory experience. And so if we forget that there's a whole body involved in this event, then we're not going to get to the regulation that needs to happen in order to be ready for learning. So at high school, taking the time to everybody take a deep breath, for the adult in the room to be talking in a calm and competent state, which I admit I'm not always doing. I'm thinking, I have 30 minutes and we have to cover this. I'm going to talk really quickly to this grade 12 student. And before I know it, we're both dysregulated because I set the tone that way. But if I can calm my speech, if I can calm my breathing, then we regulate together. We have no choice. It's physiological that your body is going to match my state. And so we can do that together with our students. Take a moment when they come in. Hi, everyone. Let's shake it off. Let's get comfortable. Let's connect. Like you said, we take a few of those moments, and then we've primed the brain for that learning.
Yeah.
And that's no different for any student in the room, is it?
Everyone needs that and everyone benefits from it. And if they don't think they need it, once they experience it, they realize they did need it. How many times as adults have we gone into, a PD, for example, that is about just not getting work done. We're just here for self-care, or we're here to relax. We're here to kind of give our brains a break. And so many teachers, their first thought is, but I have so much work to do. Like, I could be using this time to do work. And then once you actually accept the fact that this is time for feeling calm, afterwards, you're always saying, wow, I needed that more than I thought I did. You don't realize you need it until you do it. And then you can feel your body in a different state and recognize that you're actually in a better state to accomplish more. So it's kind of backwards, you feel like you're taking time for this, but in the end, you're going to accomplish more. And thank you for sharing that story about how, sometimes you get that way too, where you're thinking, gotta get so much done. That's so natural and so normal. So for those of you listening, if that's something that you are experiencing as well, you're noticing yourself rushing, like, we're never going to stop doing that as adults. That's normal. But if we can recognize that thought and recognize how that affects our emotions and the energy we're giving off, it's just a practice, like practicing mindfulness, practicing recognizing when you're rushing and just taking a deep breath, slowing it down a bit, and just observing the difference. That's been a practice I've been doing this year, observing the difference of when I'm teaching from a calm state, or taking that time to connect, taking that time to do the mindfulness practice ahead of time. Then afterwards, I can look back and say, oh yeah, today I accomplished a lot. I didn't need to rush. I was able to get all the important things done without rushing. But your brain only believes that once you've actually experienced it and played with it,
Right. And so you said something really key there for me. You said it's about the practice. And when I am working with a student who I've been curious about what's happened or what is happening to them, and again, I don't need to know all the details to know something is impacting this one in front of me. But when I'm curious about that, what I know is that my time with them, as limited as it may be in the schedule, whether you're seeing them for 3 classes a week or an hour a day or half of the day, it's still limited in the whole spectrum of their life experiences, right? But while they're with us, we can practice this as a safe space. I'm giving their brain and their body an opportunity to have that repetition of, this is a safe, calm space. And while we're here, we're going to lower the arousal in your body. And we're going to help over time to make this a safe space to learn and let go of some of that's been taking up the fight, flight, and freeze senses of your entire body and brain, right?
Yeah.
And so we really want to engage in that repetition and that practice because that's a piece of long-term recovery. We may not see a student get from victim to survivor to thriver in the course of one semester. In fact, I would expect not, but we play a piece in that recovery. And that's really what we're doing, is helping people move from surviving these kinds of events to being able to thrive in really difficult circumstances, because sadly, they're likely to experience difficulty at some point in their life, again in the future, and we're laying that pathway in the brain for how do I cope with that.
Right. And one thing just came to mind too with, we're talking about creating this routine, and you said, this is a safe space, that they know that when they're coming into this space, they can be safe. And then that's going to start really building into their body's reaction when they're not even thinking about it. So,
Right.
Our body learns how it needs to, what arousal state it needs to be in when we are in different situations, right?
Yes.
If you're getting up in front of a crowd, your body knows immediately that it needs to, send some stress hormones through so that you're ready to speak in front of this large crowd, or, those things where you get there and your body just does it. Mm-hmm. Same thing when they're coming into the classroom. What is that repetitive state that we're getting their body into so it can become a practiced routine? If it's always safe space in our classroom, over time, when that student walks into the classroom, their body's going to naturally go out of the fight and flight and into the rest and restore, because it's built that habit, that situational location habit. And I think sometimes we don't think of it that way, of how our body and our brain are always looking for routine. And when we have this routine of calmness in our classroom, the body is going to automatically get itself in that state over time, without having to think about it as much. And I've definitely noticed that in my own classroom over time. You're seeing these routines built in, and you definitely see this in the elementary classroom when you're first starting, say, a mindfulness practice in the classroom. They don't settle right away in the beginning, but over time they build this routine, and it's like they can get to that calm state faster and with more ease, because it's just become a routine. Their body, like you said, they build those pathways, and their brain and body know how to get into that calm state faster and more easily.
Right. And what a gift that is to give someone. I mean, imagine if I'm a 17-year-old and the only time that I get a break from a heightened level of arousal is for the hour every other day that I'm in your room. Right? I'm working with someone right now who said when she goes home and she puts her hand on the door handle to open the front door, she feels her body tense because she's not sure what's going to be happening on the other side of the door. So while she's at school, she gets a break from that tension. She gets to allow her brain to think about something else and to be distracted by something else. And as you said, to be forming other pathways, to be forming other automated responses. And she needs that in order to manage the time period when that's not possible for her. Mm-hmm. So she's not getting it, when she walks in that door at home necessarily in her example, but thank goodness she's getting it from her school and her school staff. And so we're really trying to build those resiliency skills, those regulatory skills, so that we can foster post-traumatic growth, so that we can foster moving forward with those protective factors in place for the future. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Am I saying that in a way that makes sense? Okay.
That's really great. And it feels like relaxing as a teacher to know that this doesn't have to be complicated. Creating a trauma sensitive classroom sounds like it might be a complicated thing, but it isn't. You're creating a safe space for everyone, which I think probably all teachers have an idea of at least where to start in doing that.
Well, we're asking so much of teachers, and now
Yeah.
you want them to be trauma informed too. I mean, it's a lot, right? But knowing that the way you are with students is really what's going to be laying the groundwork for them to thrive and to move forward into post-traumatic growth is so important. And like you said, it gives us a bit of a relief to know, okay, this is how I approach it. I don't need to learn a new technique or strategy necessarily, or know the details. I need to be able to connect in a regulatory way to help this person feel safe in my presence.
Yeah, that's so great. And one thing that I've been noticing, just the way that school is structured this year, is that students are staying in their classrooms, but teachers are moving. So I've had a lot of opportunity to observe other teachers' interactions with students. And I've really been appreciating seeing how each teacher does it differently. And that it's wonderful the way that they do it because it fits their personality. And each teacher, there's one teacher in our school that he has nicknames for every single student. And, I just see how it makes them feel that connection in such a special way. And that's so not my style. I have a hard time remembering names, never mind coming up with nicknames for students, so I do it in a very different way. And each of our ways are perfect because we're doing it in a way that is true to us. And so I think that each teacher listening right now can just think of, what are my strengths and what are the ways that this comes natural to me to create that safe space, to create that connection, to create those routines. You're probably already doing a really good job in a lot of ways. And maybe you can build on what you're already doing in the classroom just by seeing, okay, what am I already doing? And how can I maybe put a little more emphasis on that, or keep it more consistent, or, play to your strengths?
Yes. And I would also then ask 3 questions of myself. What does it feel like to be in this space? What does it sound like to be in this space? And what would it be like to be a learner in this space? Right? And sometimes we design spaces or classrooms that feel great to us, but we haven't thought about, what is it like for the 11-year-old that comes in here? What does it sound like in here? Oh, my heater is really loud and the clock ticks and the alarms in the building are quite disruptive and jarring, right? So maybe those are things we can look at. I have a student I'm working with right now who has said that she can't be here if we're going to have a fire drill. Her system is too highly aroused right now that startle response in her is terrifying. Well, that's really important feedback, and that's actually a pretty easy thing for us to deal with as a school, because we know we need to connect with her on the fire drill day and say, we're having one. Right? And at the same time, I can work with her on, what happens if we have an unexpected fire drill that nobody planned for? How will you be safe? But knowing that, we can then move forward and make plans, right? And then what does it feel like? What does it sound like? And how does learning go in here? Is that at a really rapid pace that is overwhelming and creates a heightened arousal? Or is it at a pace that's meeting the needs of the people in this room? And those are the questions that educators are already so good at. But sometimes we do need another person to come in and say, what does it feel like in here? Like when you come in this room, does this feel like a place where you can take a deep breath and relax? And we sometimes need to ask that as our whole school. When we walk in the front doors, is it really loud and busy and too many people are around and it's hard to come in here? Or is this a welcoming, comforting, warm space? And I think it really starts by looking at all of those components, the environment around us, the people in that environment, and the way it feels and sounds and looks.
I love that. I really like the idea of kind of getting into the headspace of the learner and going through those, because I do the what does it look like, sound like, feel like a lot with my students when it comes to creating expectations in the classroom. Like, what is the climate that we want to create in this classroom? What is the culture we want to create in this classroom? And we talk about it using that, that Y chart of those
Yes.
3 senses. But I haven't thought of using that as kind of a way to evaluate, am I creating this thing that I wanted to create? Like if I was a student walking into this classroom, how is that experience different from what it feels like as the teacher?
And teachers have been amazing this year, haven't they, at trying to make duplex classrooms, which for those who don't know, when I use that term, it means 2 rooms into one, right? People who are trying to manage between multiple spaces and manage virtually, and manage with half of their students missing, right? All of the different things that are being asked of us this year. I think everybody's doing a really great job of thinking, how do I still create a comfortable space for students? But it's even more important for our students who have experienced trauma. And we've seen that every time that our levels have changed here in Manitoba, that there's been heightened responses at schools, or that elementary schools had to, move to create more space between students or alter the way that their classrooms were configured. Every single time they've done that, it's been our students who had a trauma history who had the greatest difficulty making those adaptations, making those adjustments. And it's because they didn't feel safe. It's because it didn't feel comfortable again. And we had to settle that arousal response all over again.
Right. So do you have any recommendations for teachers that know that there's going to be a change coming up? Things that they can do to support their students, and all students, those that have experienced trauma and those that we don't know have experienced trauma and those that might in the future. How do we ensure that we are sort of easing that transition for our students as best as we can?
Well, so part of it is building those protective factors for the unexpected, because we can't expect everything, right? I don't necessarily know ahead of time that I'm going to be sick and that there'll be a substitute teacher, but I can talk to my students about, what if there was a substitute, or if I were to be away, I want you to know that these things would continue, that I would leave notes about this, for example. As much planning and preparation as we can do in calm ways is so critical. A colleague of mine who's a teacher tells her students, I'm going to be away on Friday. It's not because I have COVID. And she said she can immediately see them sort of start breathing again, because they worry about you if you're not there, right?
Yeah.
Especially during a pandemic. And so she says, I just have a regular doctor's appointment. You don't need to panic. Here's what I've done for you that day. But we can also talk about the what ifs. What if I were away, but I wasn't able to tell you ahead of time? What would you need to know? What would you need in place? Who would you want to come check on you? And our educational assistants are so important during those days as well, right? Like they can, when they're away, it's deeply felt by our students. But also just transitioning. I have a student that I'm not going to be seeing in about a month's time, because they'll be moving. And so we've been talking about, like, our time together is coming to an end. How are we going to, say goodbye to one another? How will we do that transition? What skills do you need? What support do you need? And she said to me yesterday, what am I going to do without Tuesdays with Kim? And we laughed, but the truth is we don't know what we're going to do without Tuesdays with Kim until we've talked about that, right? And so you have the skills and you have the support. And I always look at those two things. Are we giving our students the support, and are we helping them build the skills to manage the unexpected, to build that resilience? And of course, that's going to look differently at different developmental ages, but it's crucial to all of us at any age. Do I have the skills to deal with this crisis? And do I have the support? That's so important. I don't care who you are and what grade you're in. That's what we need to deal with the unexpected. So how do we do little bits that help build that?
That's really great. And, I like how you mentioned asking the student, asking, what do you need to be able to manage this? I think that's something that maybe sometimes we overlook. And even sometimes this year, I've had days where I've just noticed kids are off. It's definitely happens more when the COVID levels are changing, and it means that there might be a change in how things are structured. I can see that anxiety rising, feel it in the classroom. And sometimes you kind of want to just like give them information and be like, okay, here's strategies you can use to manage your anxiety. But sometimes it's really helpful to just ask them, like, what's going on? How are you feeling, and what do you need today?
Right.
Do you need a movement break? Do you need to just talk? Do you need a slower day? Do you need a bigger break at the end of class? And oftentimes they can articulate what they need even better than we kind of expect them to be able to.
Oh, and they can articulate it much better than most of us as adults.
Yeah.
When I was working with a family recently, and we were talking about the sense of stress in their whole household and their whole family system. And I said, where do you feel that stress in your body? And the only one who could answer it was the middle year student, because she'd been taught about that, right? Both parents said, I've never thought about that before. Well, that would be important to think about, because our body is likely telling us that we're in a high aroused state long before our mind has clued into that fact, right? And so how do we start to recognize that? Those things that we're teaching children now are so important in making them healthy, resilient adults. But it's a long process.
Definitely is, which is, where the recommendation of creating routines and systems in the classroom to ensure, like, we can't teach this all in one day. It has to be just little nuggets throughout the year so that we're building on their skills over time and building that capacity in them. And I just really like thinking of this through the lens of not only how are we supporting students that have experienced trauma, but how are we giving them the skills that will allow them to be resilient when they experience trauma in the future. Don't think I would even say if, because everyone experiences trauma differently in different ways, different levels. But everyone needs skills to be able to work through these things. So yeah, thinking about the strategies and support, I really like that. That's something that I'm going to keep top of mind.
Yes, the statistics would certainly bear out that 2/3 of us as adults are living with a traumatic experience or traumatic stress, and therefore it's a strategy that we all need, as you said, and need to have built up before it's happened to. How will we respond? Who will we call upon? What skills will we need to call upon in ourselves? And what supports will we need? I think it's really important for us to think about that. And if we bring it back to the trauma experience, you can see that that's why we don't need to know the details. We don't need to know what specifically happened to you, what are the details of your experience. What we need to know is, how do I create safety around you? How do I create connection around you? How do I help you build protective skills and factors in your life so that your system can feel safe and can connect and then can learn?
That's wonderful. This is a wonderful conversation. I'm so happy that we have had the chance to connect with you. So you've mentioned some great resources. Would you want to list now some resources that you would recommend for teachers? And we'll put them in the show notes as well. But I think I'm sure there will be teachers that will be interested in learning more. So where would you point them?
Well, there are so many, so this is by no means an exhaustive list, but I picked a few of my favorites. You've heard me talk about Dr. Bruce Perry today, so I would recommend his book that's called The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. It's kind of a classic. I think it's a great place for all of us to start. And Dr. Jody Carrington from Alberta has written Kids These Days. And it's got lots of great strategies, but also a chapter specific to dealing with trauma. And then I am going to refer you to a document called Making Space for Learning through the Australian Childhood Foundation. It's about trauma-informed practice in schools. And I will give you the website location to access that. But they have, I believe it's 100 strategies in that document that we can utilize in schools, specific over and above to what we've talked about today. Certainly there are things in there like be conscious of how loud the school bells are, or, create safe routines in your classrooms, but they go into even more specifics than we had time to talk about, certainly. And then I think, I'm sure some of the people listening are parents, and I would also recommend Dr. Dan Siegel's book, The Power of Showing Up. It's just a wonderful book that focuses on attachment and connection. And awesome. You know that my favorite is always Dr. Bruntrow, Dr. Broken Leg, and Dr. Van Bakkern's Reclaiming Youth at Risk. And so I could go on, but let's stop there. I think if people started with those ones, they'd get the perspective.
Yeah, it's a really great start, and we'll link all of those directly into the show notes so that, you can, when you're listening to this on your podcast app, you should be able to see the show notes right from there and click directly on the links to be able to find these resources. You can also find our show notes on our website. If you go to educom.com/blog, you'll find our podcast page where we have all of our episodes, and all of the information on each episode is there. Well, this was just such a great conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your expertise with us. Could you leave us with one last thought? So for someone that's just starting out on their journey of creating safer spaces in their classroom, what would you recommend to them, or what words of wisdom would you have for them?
Oh, I would say my favorite quote is, I'll share two, okay? A teacher affects all eternity. You can never tell where your influence ends. And to have helped one life to breathe easier, that is to have fulfilled your purpose.
Ooh, that one gave me the tingles. Thank you so much, Kim. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
All right. I hope that you feel better equipped now to create a trauma-sensitive classroom and incorporate this into your teaching practices. Now, we referred a lot to strategies and things that we've taught about on the show in the past. So I didn't go into lots of detail about specific ways to create routines in the classroom, or specific mindfulness practices or breathing strategies that you can do to calm the nervous system and prepare the mind and body for learning. So if you're new to the show, or maybe you've been around for a while and you're thinking, I want to brush up on some of these strategies, definitely go through our past episodes, choose the titles that call to you to learn more about very actionable, specific things you can do in your classroom to create safe spaces and to equip your students with really specific tools that they can use for resiliency throughout their lives. And of course, if you would like a ready-to-use resource that's bilingual in both English and French, that makes creating a calm and focused learning atmosphere easy with ready-to-use resources, you definitely have to check out Educom Classroom, our social emotional learning and mindfulness program made for the K-12 classroom. So go to educalm.com, that's spelled EDUCALME. And from there, you can sign up for the free trial to Educom Classroom. So this is going to give you access to the Start Here theme in the program. So in that theme, you get training and resources that'll make it really easy for you to get started with this program, answer all of your questions, help you to feel very confident in using the Educom Classroom program to teach mindfulness in your classroom. You'll learn about building those routines. You'll learn about how to create that connection after doing the practice together. And then you also get our first unit of EduCalm Classroom, Introduction to Mindfulness, for free. So this is going to give you 2-minute and 5-minute guided mindfulness practices in both English and in French that teach you and your students and guide you through exercises to help you calm down, soothe that nervous system, and help your brain and body be ready for calm and focused learning. It also includes some printables that can be super helpful in attaching what you and your students are learning during these guided audio mindfulness practices into your regular teaching curriculum. So there's activities, posters, student reflection booklets, all sorts of things to make this so easy, zero prep to use in your classroom. So again, that's educalm.com. Sign up for the free trial, which never expires. And if you're really enjoying the free trial, sign up for the full year membership. That'll give you 12 months access to all of our resources, which is going to give you more than enough guided mindfulness practices for every single day of the entire school year. Zero prep. Go check it out, educalm.com. All right, if you enjoyed this episode and you got value from it, please share it with a friend or a colleague that you think would enjoy it too. Have a fantastic week. We are so appreciative of you and all the wonderful work you're doing in the world. Keep being awesome.